Hey friends, what's up? Welcome back to Babylon Talmud. Today we're studying Daf Tesvav, I think. Daf 15 of Masechta Ksubis. Friends, today we're going to wrap up the first parak of Masechta Ksubis, which is pretty cool. One parak into Masechta Ksubis. So far it's been alright, I think. It's no Yavamis. Thank God. Anyways, yeah, so it's interesting daf, we continue in the Machlokas of Gamliel and Yoshua kind of, but also we get into the sugyas of like Rov and Kol de Parish, Meruba Parish, Kol Kavua, Kmerza, Mertzutami. These are sugyas that we've seen before, but they're going to come up again in today's daf, so interesting stuff. Let's jump in on Daf Yudal and Beis at the Mishnah, about 8 lines from the bottom. Omer Biosi. Says Rabbi Yossi, there was a story with a girl who went to fill up water from a spring, Vinansa, and she got raped. Amar Reb Yochanan ben Nuri, says Reb Yochanan ben Nuri, Imrov Anshe Ir Masin Lechuna, Hayazotinasi Lechuna. Look, if the place where this happened, most of the people in the city are people that would be able to marry a Kohen, they're not apostle or anything like that. So then she is not apostle either, and she would still be able to marry a Kohen. Says the Gemara, Omele Rava Rav Nachman, says Rava to Rav Nachman, Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri do Omer Kiman. So says Rava to Rav Nachman, who is Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri going like? That he's saying that, if the majority of the people there are kosher, so then she's kosher. But, if the majority of the people wouldn't be kosher, then she wouldn't be kosher. So, who's it like? If it's like Rabban Gamliel, afilu bro psulanami machsher, right? As we saw, I think we saw Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi the other day, right? That Rabban Gamliel says that we believe her, that she's kosher. So, it would be, even if the majority of the people are apostles, she would be kosher. And if Rabbi Yeshua, and if it's Rabbi Yeshua, then even if most of the people were kosher, he would still say that we can't rely upon her. So Rav says of Nachman to Rava that this is what Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rab, Bekronos Shel Tzipori Hoya Maise. So says Rav Nachman to Rava that Rav Yehuda says in the name of Rab that, really it is going like Rabbi Yoshua, but the reason why she can marry a Kohen over here is because there's actually 2 roves going on. Bekronos Shel Tzipori, that says, reviewed in the name of Rab, that this Davka happened Bekronos Shel Tzipori, right? Tzipori was a place, that's where Rabbi Yossi was, right? So Tzipori was a place where most people were kosher, and it was on the day of the market where people were coming into town, and those people were also a majority of people that were kosher. And because there was a double rove, a double majority of people being kosher, that is why we could assume that she is kosher as well. And like Reb Ami, the Amar Reb Ami, that says, Reb Ami, V'ushaisa Siya Shel Pnei Adam Ksher Noveres L'Sham, that Davka, because there was a group of kosher people that were there as well. Like Rabbi Yanai, the Amar Rabbi Yanai, Nivelas Bekronis Ksher L'Chuna, that Rabbi Yanai says that if she had bia in a wagon, so then she's keshera to marry a kohen. Bekronis Akadati, what do you mean? I don't understand. That if she has bia in a wagon, then she's kosher to marry a kohen? What does that mean? Nivelas Bishas Kronis Ksher L'Chuna. No, what it means is that if she had bia at a time that there were other wagons around, i.e., at the Shuk of Tzipori, where Tzipori is a place where most people are kosher, and these wagons that were coming into town, most of them were kosher as well. So then, because there's a double rove, that is why she would be able to be married, right? A double rove of kosher. So then, that's why she would be able to marry a kohen. Avol perish echad mitzipori uvaal havlad shtuki. But if there was only one rove, right? If it was just the fact that it was a fellow from Tzipori who slept with her, that wouldn't, then we wouldn't be able to assume that the child is kosher. Rather, we wouldn't know what the status of the child is. That it's like when Rav Dimi came, he said in the name of Zeiri, Amr B'Chanina, the name of B'Chanina, V'Amrila, Amr Zeiri, Amr B'Chanina. Some Taka say just Zeiri says the name of B'Chanina, Holchin Achar Rov Ha'ir, Ve'ein Holchin Achar Rov Siya. That we go based on the majority of the city, right? If the majority of the city is kosher, then they're kosher, but we don't go based on the majority of the group of travelers. Klapilai, to which the Gemara says, what? That doesn't make any sense. Hani naide v'hane kviye v'kaime. 1 second, if we're going to trust anybody, it would be the people traveling, because they're on the move, as opposed to people in the city. They are stationary, as we're going to see in a few lines from now. Right, we're going to bring up the concept that we've seen before of kol kavua ki mechza al mechza damit, that anything that is fixed is automatically treated like 50-50. So meaning, if you have people in the city, and the city is a static place, a stationary place, right? People live there, they're not going anywhere. So even if the majority is kosher, nonetheless, we would have to say kol kavua ki mechza al mechza dami. We treat them as a suffix, as a 50-50, and therefore we would not be able to rely upon that, as opposed to the people traveling. Well, they're on the move, they're not in a fixed place, so if anything, we should be able to rely on their majority, and if they're a majority of kosher people, then that should be okay. So rather, what they're saying is that we can go after the majority of the city, i.e., in a place like Tzipori, where most people are kosher, we can assume that the fellow who slept with this girl was kosher, as long as there is also a majority coming from the travelers coming into town, if they are also a majority of kosher people who would be able to marry Kohanim. So the double majority of the city, as well as the travelers, the visitors, so that is what enables us to assume that she is kosher. Okay, fine. Okay, so ve'ein holchen acharov ha'ir gredasa, but we would not rely only upon the majority of the city alone, right? The fact that in Tzipori most people are kosher, that is not enough. V'lo acharov siya gredasa, and we also do not follow the majority of the travelers of the group alone. My time, how come we can't rely upon the majority of the group alone? If there are a majority of kosher people and they're not fixed, rather they're moving, so shouldn't we be allowed to rely upon that majority? Well, gzer of siya atu of hayir. Yes, technically we should be able to rely upon the majority of this group of travelers, but we're concerned that if we rely upon their majority to say that that she's kosher, so then we would also rely upon the majority in the city, and the city is not, right? That's fixed, and therefore it's like 50-50, not like a majority. But 1 second, but even when it comes to the city, if they went to her, i.e. they were moving around, well then we wouldn't say kol kavua k'mechza mechza dami, rather we would say kol the parish meruba parish, that this fellow who slept with her came from the majority, i.e. it was probably kosher. So l'tzricha dika'az le'i ligabayr. Yeah, but it's talking about a case where she went to them, and therefore they didn't go anywhere, they were stationary, and therefore it's only like they were like 50% kosher, 50% puzzle, and therefore we cannot assume that she slept with somebody kosher. That if she went to them, then it's considered fixed. That whenever you have a fixed amount, then the majority becomes irrelevant. It's just considered like 50-50, and it's uncertain. 1 second. Do we really require this double majority? But we learn in the Brisa, Teisha Chanuyos. We've seen this before, I think at least twice. Let's see, it's quoted in Psachim. Okay, I think we've seen this Teisha Chanuyos more than just in Psachim. So Teisha Chanuyos, Kula Mochers B'sar Shchuta, that you have these 9 stores, and they all sell kosher meat. V'achas Mocheres B'sar Nevela, but then you have one store that sells non-kosher meat. V'lokach me'echod me'achas mein, and he chaptarain meat from one of the stores, but he's not sure, but he's not sure which one he took from. So we know exactly what the proportions are. 9 are kosher, 1 is not kosher. He knows that he walked into one of them, purchased meat, but that he's not sure which one. So sveiko aser. So the suffix is aser, because that's kol kavua k'mechza mechza dam. We know that there's 9 are kosher, 1 is pasul. So we know exactly what the sort of breakdown is. We know that this guy went into one of the stores, Now he's just not sure which one. So now do we say, well, the chances are that he went to a kosher one? No, we say that we have to view it as if it's 50-50, and it's a suffix, and we don't know if it's kosher, if he has kosher meat or pasul or treif meat. But what if he didn't go into a store to buy, rather he just finds a piece of meat lying in this area and he doesn't know the source of the origin of the meat? Well, in that case, we could go based on the majority, and we'll assume called the parish muba parish that this piece of meat probably came from a kosher store. So there we're saying that you could eat the meat, that you can assume that it's came from a kosher store, and that's only one majority. The majority of the 9 stores being kosher. Well, maybe you could say, well, it's talking about a situation where the gates to the city or the state were not locked, i.e. the ka'asila ruba me'ama, that there's also other people coming into this town, and their majority is also a majority of kosher. So maybe it was a double rov. But Reb Zer says no, even if the gates were locked, and we know that there's only the majority, this current majority, that 9 of the stores are kosher, one of them is treif. So based on that majority alone, you could assume that this piece of meat that you find is kosher meat. So the Gemara says, look, in general, 1 rov is enough. But here when it comes to yuchsin, when we're saying who can marry a Kohen, so then in order for, in this situation, this girl to be able to marry a Kohen, there would have to be a double rov, right? So for example, that the majority of the people in Tzipori are kosher people, and the majority of the people who are coming into Tzipori for the market are also kosher people as well. Gufa, we said earlier, the Reb Zer had said that whenever you have sort of a fixed amount, so then we view it as 50-50, right? So for example, we have these 9 stores. So even though 9 of them are kosher and 1 of them is treif, nonetheless, because we know exactly the proportions, right? 9 are kosher, 1 is treif. So if a guy goes into one of them and he's not sure which one he went into, so he can't assume, well, it's a 90% chance that he went into the kosher one. Rather, it's 50-50. So bein lekula, bein lechumra, and this is whether to be lenient or to be stringent. So minale the Reb Zera, how does Reb Zera know this? Ilema mitesha chanuyos. Well, if it's from our example that we just gave, you have the 9 stores, kula mochus b'sar shchuta, they're all selling kosher meat, v'achas b'sar nevela, and one of them is selling non-kosher meat, v'lokach me'achas mein, and he goes and he purchases from one of the stores, v'en yodeh me'eza me'en lokach, but he doesn't know which store he purchased from. Sveiko osir, so then the suffix is osir because of kokavo k'mechza mechzadami uvenimtza. But if you find a piece, in the public area outside all of these stores, and you don't know which one it came from, well, in that case, arov, you can go based on the majority. So what do we see? We saw in the ratio that if he goes into one of the buildings, one of the butchers, so then we have to assume that it's a suffix whether the meat is kosher or not, right? Because kokavo k'mechza mechzadami. The fact that we know that it's 9 kosher ones and 1 non-kosher one, so we don't view it as a majority 90% kosher, rather we view it as 50-50, and you can't eat that meat. So asam l'chumra, okay, fine. So there it's being specifically stringent to say that, I would think that 90% chance it's kosher meat, but we're saying no, and we're being stringent and saying that you cannot eat the meat. So rather from, if you have 9 frogs, now frogs are not sheritzes, so you have 9 dead frogs, and then you have 1 dead toad. So now a dead toad would be a sheretz. And you touch one of them, and he's not sure which one he touched. So again, so we have 9 of them are kosher, 1 of them is tamei. So sveiko tamei, well, we're not sure. We have to assume that he's tamei because that even though yes, 9 of them are tahor, but because we know that 1 of them is tamei, so we have to view it as a 50-50 chance, and we don't know if he touched the tamei one or not. Hasam nami, but they're also l'chumra. We're being stringent, right? We're saying even though you would think that you can assume that he's tahor because 9 out of 10 of them are tahor, but still we're being stringent to say that because of that 1, so it's like 50-50, and we have to assume that he's tamei. But rather it's from the opposite. When you have 9 toads, when you have 9 sheritzes, and then there's one frog which is tahor among them, and he touched one of them, he doesn't know which one he touched. So just like, when 9 of them were tahor and one of them was tameh, we said, well, we have to be concerned that you touched the tameh one. Well, the same thing applies in the opposite as well. That when 9 of them are tameh and one of them is tahor, so we assume not that it's a 90% chance that he touched the tameh one, but rather it's a 50% chance, we don't know, and therefore B'Rishus HaYachid Sfeiko Tameh, B'Rishus HaRabim Sfeiko Tahor. And therefore, if it's in Rishus HaYachid, so then the suffix is Tameh. If it's in Rishus HaRabim, the suffix is Tahor, because we have a concept of suffix Tumah B'Rishus HaRabim Tahor. That if there's a suffix Tumah in Rishus HaRabim, so then we can assume that it's Tahor. So here also, right, there were 9 of them were Tameh, 1 of them were Tahor, right? 9 of them were these sheritzes, 1 of them was a frog, which is Tahor. So now, we don't say, well, 90% chance is that he touched the Tameh one. Rather, we say it's a 50-50 chance. And therefore, if it's in Rishus HaRabim, we would say that he's Tahor. If it's in Rishus HaYachid, so then Safek Tumah B'Rishus HaYachid is Tahor. But what do we see? We see that even to be lenient, right, we don't say that it's a 90% chance that he touched the Tameh one. Rather, we say it's a 50-50% chance that he may have touched the Tahor one. And if it's in Rishus HaRabim, he would be Tahor. So we see that Kol Kavok Mechza Mechza Dami works both to be stringent, like we saw by the 9 stores, as well as when you have 9 Tahor, like frogs, but we also see it's to be lenient when you have 9 sheritzes and 1 frog. In all of those cases, we view it as 50-50. Mida Oraisa Minolan. How do we know that even Mida Oraisa, we say Kol Kavok Mechza Mechza Dami? Alright, it seems that there's a little kid here playing piano. I'm sure he's a nice guy, but very distracting. Okay, Mida Oraisa Minolon. So how do we know that even Mida Oraisa, we say Kol Kavua K'mechza Mechza Dami? So Omer Kra, wow, that's very distracting. Omer Kra, the pasuk says, V'arav lo v'kam alav, ad she'iskavin lo. So the pasuk says, if a fellow kills another fellow, so it says v'arav lo v'kam alav, that he will sort of ambush him. So says Reb Shimon, so Gemara in Sanhedrin, we're going to get to him in Sechta Sanhedrin. Wow, this kid is just hitting the keys. Anyways, so it says Reb Shimon, v'arav lo v'kam alav, you have to specifically intend for that fellow, right? So if you intended to kill Reuven and by accident you killed Shimon, so you're potter, because in order to be chayiv, you have to kill the person who you intended to kill. So the rabbis argue with that, and they say, no, look, if he intended to kill Reuven and he killed Shimon, he was intending to kill somebody, and he did. So then he'd be chayiv. So then what do you learn out from the pasuk of Arav lo v'kam alav? So Rabbanon Amrei Devei Rabbi Yanai, the rabbi said by the Besmedrash, Rabbi Yanai prat lezoik even lego. What it comes is to exclude a situation where you take a stone and you throw it into a crowd, and in that case you would be potter because you didn't have specific intention for a person. Now, hechidami, what's the deal with this crowd? Right, because after all, the rabbi said if you intended to kill Reuven and you killed Shimon, so then you're chayiv. So if you throw it into a crowd and it's all Yidden, so you intended to kill a Yid and you did kill a Yid, so you should be chayiv. So hechidami, if it's talking about a crowd where there are 9 Canaanites and 1 Yid, so then Benem, so v'tepikle deruba Canaanim nenu. So I could assume that the reason why I don't need a pasuk to tell me that he'd be potter, I know he'd be potter because the majority are Canaanites, and therefore he'd be potter for killing them. Inami palga ufalga, and if you're going to say it's talking about a situation where it's 50-50, right, 50% Canaanites, 50% Yidden, Safek Nefashos Hakol, still he wouldn't be chayiv because it's a 50-50 chance he killed the Yid, 50-50 chance he killed the Canaanite. So therefore we'd say in general Safek Nefashos Hakol, we're lenient, right? We don't want to give out capital offenses, we don't want to execute people, and therefore if there is a possibility for us to say that he's potter, so then we'll say that he's potter. And here there's a possibility because we'll say, look, it's a 50% chance, maybe he killed a Canaanite. So lo tzricha dikatishri Yisraelim v'Kanaani echad, rather it's talking about a situation where there were 9 Yidden and 1 Canaanite, and therefore based on the majority, I would think that he would be chayiv, right? Because the majority of Yidden. But nonetheless, that one Canaanite is a fixed presence, and any fixed presence is like 50-50, and therefore we don't go by the majority and assume that he killed a Yid. Rather, we say there was a Canaanite there, and therefore it's like 50-50, and it's a suffix, and therefore he would be potter. So there you have it, based on V'arav Lo V'Kama Lo. We have a precedence in the Torah for Kol Kavua K'mechza Mechza Dami. Itmar was stated of Chia Bar Ashi Omer Rab Halacha Rabbi Yossi. So it says of Chia Bar Ashi in the name of Rab that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi, like our Mishnah, right? We said that there was this girl and she got raped, and then so it says Rabbi Yochanan ben Nuri that if the majority of the people over there were kosher, then she's able to marry a Kohen. Rav Chanan bar Rav Omar Rab Harasha Haisa, says Rav Chanan bar Rav in the name of Rab that we only in that case where we said she can marry a Kohen, it was only in that specific case, but you can't apply it generally. We're gonna have to figure out exactly what that means. Most of Rabbi Yirmiyah, now Rabbi Yirmiyah asked the question, V'leyuchsin lo be'inan trei rube. Now 1 second. So Rabbi Yirmiyah was assuming, now we had explained that Mishnah where we say that we go based on the rove and say that she could marry a Kohen is because there were two roves, right? It happened in Sipori, where most people are kosher, and also it was the day where the people were coming in for the markets, and most of them were kosher as well. But Rabbi Yirmiyah isn't assuming that, and he's saying, so he's assuming it was just one robe, that the majority of the people where she was, I guess in Sipori, the majority of the people there were kosher, therefore she's allowed to marry a Kohen. So Rabbi Yirmiyah asked, don't you need two robes? Don't we learn in the Mishnah, mushlach, if you're in a city that has Yidden there and Ovdei Kochavim there, and then you find a baby, and now you don't know, is the baby a Yid or is the baby an Ovdei Kochavim? So Imrov Ovdei Kochavim, Oved Kochavim. So if the majority of the people there are idolaters, so we assume that the kid comes from them. Imrov Yisrael, if most of the people there are Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid. Mechza Yisrael, and even if it's 50-50, right, 50% Yid and 50% of the Kochavim, so we assume that the kid is a Yid. Rav, and says Rav, Lo shanu el la'achyoso, aval lo yuchsin lo. And says Rav, look, when we say that if the majority of the place are Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid, that just means, so Bezdin, takes responsibility to make sure that he has what he needs and stuff. But the yuchsin, can we assume that he can marry a Kohen? No, that wouldn't be the case. So what do we see? So we see that there's one rove, right? There's a rove that it's a majority of Yidden in the place. Nonetheless, that would not be enough, says Rav, to be able to allow him to marry a Kohen. If it's a girl, she wouldn't be allowed to marry a Kohen. Shmuel Amr says Shmuel, Nefakech olav v'sagal, and Shmuel says when we say that if the majority is Yidden, so then we treat the kid as a Yid, it means that we can even be Machal Shabbos in order to, save him from like rubble or something like that. Now the Gemara is going to, clarify this in a little bit, that it's not just if the majority are Yidden, but okay, we'll get there in a few minutes. So now, so Rabbi Yirmiyah asks, I don't understand. How could we be saying, right, that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi? How could Rav be saying that the halacha is like Rabbi Yossi? That if the majority of the people there were kosher, then we can assume that she can marry a Kohen. But don't you need a double rove? So Shtamit say, Hadam Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, well, he had forgotten about that which Rav Yehuda said in the name of Rav, Bikronis shel Tzipori Havamaise, like we said earlier, that, it wasn't simply that the majority of the people in Tzipori are kosher, but it was also the market when there were people coming into town and they were also a majority kosher. Rav Chanan bar Rave, so now 1 second. Rav Chanan bar Rave had said that, look, they only paskin that she could marry a Kohen in that particular case, right? But in general, we wouldn't assume that she would have been able to marry a Kohen. Now, if we're saying that that's talking about where there was a double majority of kosher, right? That most of the people in Sipori are kosher, and most of the people who were coming in for the market are ksherim. So there was a double majority of kosher people, and says Chanan bar Ravit that Davka, that in that case we required a double majority, but in general we would not require a double majority. But then if that's the case, right, where am I? Meaning if he's saying that Davka, in that particular case, they needed the double majority, but in general you would not need a double majority, then what do you do with this Brisa where it says that if the majority of the, right, you find this baby, and we're saying if the majority of the people Darton are Yidden, so then we can assume that the baby is a Yid, and says Rav, that's only to take care of the baby, but not for to be able to marry a Kohen, and there's only one Rov, and they're not allowed to marry a Kohen. So, man de masniya, lo masniya. So look, Rav Chanan bar Rave, who says that it was a hara shah, that is, he doesn't hold like Rav Yehuda Amar Rav, that there was a double majority. Rather, he's saying that Mishnah is talking about there's only a single majority, right? That, is in Tzipori, the majority of the people there are kosher, and that alone was enough for her to be able to marry a Kohen. And says Rav Chanan bar Rava, in the name of Rav, that was only in that particular case. But in general, as we see in this brisa where they found the kid, we would say that she would not be able to marry a Kohen with only a single rov. Gufa, we said earlier, Matzo batinok mushlach, that if we found this kid in Rov Ovdei Kochavim, if the majority of the people there are idolaters, we assume that the child is an idolater, comes from the Ovdei Kochavim. In Rov Yisrael, if the majority of the people there are Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid. Mechza Yisrael, and if it's 50-50, we also assume that the kid is a Yid. Omar Rav Loshana L'Achyoso, Rav says that when we say that if the majority are Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid, so then that's only to sort of take care of him. Aval Yuchsin Lo, but there would be no implications in terms of being able to marry a Kohen. And Shmuel says that we assume that the kid is a Yid. If it's a majority of Yid, and we assume that the kid is a Yid to the extent that we would be able to save him on Shabbos, would Shmuel really say that only in the situation where the majority of the people there are Yidden would we be able to be Machal Shabbos to save this kid? Amar of Yosef, Amar of Yehuda, Amar Shmuel, that when it comes to pikuach nefesh, we don't go based on the majority, right? We don't say that, well, if the majority are Ovdei Kochavim, then we wouldn't be Machal Shabbos to save people. No, even if the majority of people are Ovdei Kochavim, you still are able to be Machal Shabbos to save people, because even if the majority are Ovdei Kochavim, they're also still Yidden over there. You can be Machal Shabbos for the Yidden, and even if the majority are Ovdei Kochavim. So Eloki Itmar de Shmuel Aresha Itmar. Rather, when Shmuel says by the Pikuach Nefesh, it's talking about the first part of the Brisa in Rov Ovdei Kochavim Ovid Kochavim, that if the majority of the people in the city are Ovdei Kochavim, so we assume that this kid is an Ovid Kochavim. However, Shmuel Fakeach all of a Sagal Eno Kain. But in terms of being Mechal Shabbos to save somebody, we don't say, well, the majority of the people are Ovdei Kochavim, therefore we can't be Mechal Shabbos to save people. No, even in that case, you would be able to be Mechal Shabbos. Ovdei Kochavim. So then if that's the case, then when we say that if the majority of the people in the city are Ovdei Kochavim, so we assume that the kid is Ovdei Kochavim for what? To say that, well, he can eat non-kosher food. And then we say, okay, if the majority of the place are Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid with regard to what? So Papa says, well, to return a lost object. Find a lot, right? If this kid lost an object, so to do Hashavas Aveda. Yisrael. So when we say that if 50% of the city are Yid and 50% are Ovdei Kochavim, so we assume that the kid is a Yid with regard to what? So Amar Reish Lakish l'nizakin. Says Reish Lakish with regard to damages, right? Of course, as we're going to learn when we get to Masechta Nezikin, there's a concept of a shor tam and a shor muad. An ox that has been warned and an ox that has not been warned. So an ox that has not been warned, if it damages, so then the owner is responsible to pay only 50% of the damages. But if it's already an ox that's been warned, it's an ox that already has 3 times damaged, so then the owner needs to pay 100% of damages. So now we're saying that this kid who was born in a place that's 50% Ovdei Kochavim, 50% Yidden, so we assume that the kid is a Yid. It says Rishlakish, it's regard to these damages. So then, hey Chidami, what about these damages? The Torah Diday. So if we're saying, well, the ox of a Yid gored the ox of this fellow who were 50 was found in this place. It's 50% of the Kochavim, 50% Yid. So his ox got gored, and now he wants to get paid, fully. So Leimalei, Aisi Raya D'Yisraelat Ushkol. Well, then he wouldn't be able to get paid, right in full, because we would say to him, bring a proof that you are a Yid, and only then I'm going to pay you. But if you can't prove that, so I'm not going to pay you. So then it doesn't sound like he's really being treated as a Yid in that sense. So Lotzricha Dinogche Torah Didei, the Torah Didan. Rather, it's talking about where his ox gored our ox, and so meaning the gore of the ox of this fellow who was found gored the ox of a Yid. So Palga Mishalim. So then this fellow can say, look, I'm only paying 50% damages, right? If it was a short time, he's going to say, well, I'm only paying 50%. V'idach Palga, and if you want to retrieve the other 50%, Omar lehu Aisi Raya Delavi Solona Va'ate Nachun. Look, just if you could prove that I'm not a Yid, so then I'll pay you the rest of it. But otherwise, I'm saying I'm a Yid, and therefore I'm only going to have to pay you half damages because it was a short time. And therefore we're saying that if this kid was found in a place that was 50% Yid and 50% of the Kochavim, he would be able to be treated like a Yid to the extent that, well, if his ox damaged, gored the ox, another Yid's ox, so then if it was a short tam, an unwarned ox, he would only have to pay 50% damages. Now if the Yid says no, you have to pay full damages, because Kochavim who would gore the ox of a Yid, even if it's a short time, would have to pay full damages. He would say, yeah, but prove that I'm actually an Ove Kochavim, and only then I'll pay you full damages. But otherwise I'm paying you half damages, and therefore effectively, basically, he has the din of a Yid that he's only going to pay half damages. Friends, Avzav Tezvav, Masechet Ksubis. Hope you enjoy. Peace out.